Friend of the show, Chris Clarey, to our new Tennis Channel studios. It is great to have Chris join the show. Chris, Happy New Year. Good to have you with us today. Always good to see you. What do you think is going to be the biggest story in tennis for 2021?
Well, I think the potential for it being kind of the farewell year is pretty strong. Huh? I mean, looking at the Williams sisters and looking at Roger Federer, I mean, it's hard to ignore that. I mean, I think those would certainly dominate a lot of the year in terms of both the nostalgia, how they do it, and what could be their final year, and all the retrospectives and appreciation that'll go along with that, if that is the case. And I think just seeing how they all match up with the younger generation again. And obviously, Roger hasn't played in such a long time. Now he's coming back to play. Serena still has a chance. I think it's diminishing by the tournament, but she still has a chance to win a big one. So I think that will remain the big, the mainstream story, if you will.
So you mentioned Serena, obviously going for history, trying to get that major number 24, maybe even 25. I mean, her goal is to break the record. Which majors do you think are her greatest opportunities to get that done?
Hey, where the points are shorter and the rally's less grueling, and her deficiencies now in movement to the wings are less exposed, is what her best chance is. So obviously, you got to look at the faster surfaces. Wimbledon, of course, and I think it's again the U.S. Open. But I really think her chances are pretty slim now in a lot of ways, based on what's coming up in women's game and what we've seen in the last few majors.
Chris, Happy New Year. Good to see you. Sort of a big picture question. If you were going to write the tennis in the time of COVID story, if you were going to write about what we've been through over the last 10 months, what are some of the themes you've hit on? There's so many dimensions to this. What are some of the themes you'd be writing about covering tennis and COVID?
Well, I think, it's certainly survival of the fittest to some degree. I mean, we haven't seen all the fallout yet, John, in terms of who's going to end up surviving or not. But I think you can definitely feel the pressure points and the stresses. I think convergence has been a huge theme behind the scenes more than in front of the scenes. But the idea of the WTA and the ATP, that sort of convergence going more mainstream, and I think ultimately relevance, because I feel like racket sports, because of this era that we're in, are hot again in a lot of ways in terms of numbers of people playing around the world. The problem is there are a lot of different racket sports now, so it's a matter of what will tennis's role be in a world full of padel in Europe and pickleball in North America and different places. So I'm really curious to see how the sport, will be able to seize the moment, because many other racket sports are trying to do the same right now.
More people than ever might be playing racket sports. Fewer people are writing about them, in part because there's no travel and we're covering a lot of these events remotely. What's been the biggest challenge, and are there any sort of unexpected advantages to covering tennis a lot differently than you did for the previous quarter century of your career?
Well, I think the idea is that tennis is a story that sort of develops slowly, incrementally, and I think when you're there week by week by week, you can kind of get lost in the detail of it a little bit and not see the big picture. So we've had almost a whole year of big picture, John, now, and that can't be bad in a way, because it gives you a sense of what the big themes are. Had a chance to look back and really appreciate what we've lost or what we're not seeing. But in terms of the negatives, as a journalist, there are a whole bunch of them. And one of them, things that worries me a lot, is now that we've gotten used to this remote way of doing the business, this doesn't just apply to tennis. This applies to everything, any kind of journalism. If you can do it by Zoom and with no real contact with the subjects that you're covering, that gives people ideas. And I'm afraid that when we come back to the sport on a regular basis, there'll be even more distance between the journalists and the players and people that they cover, because we now know it's possible. So I hope everybody has a long, deep breath about that and thinks it over, because I don't think that's good for the public or for the sport.
Speaking of sad news in the press room, you and I both lost a friend and colleague. Tom Perrotta passed away this week at age 44. You had a lovely email yesterday you sent suggesting that we name some sort of award for young journalists in Tom's honor. What should people know about Tom Perrotta?
It's been a tough couple of days, John. I mean, Tom was a good friend of mine. Spent a lot of time with him over the years. He's not somebody the general public would know, but what you should know is that Tom was a passionate lover of the game and critic of the game, and somebody who was a fine craftsman when he was writing his stories, and took the great pleasure in the details. He kind of called himself the king of quirky stories. He loved to go find the person giving out the towels and trying to track him down at Wimbledon, or the strawberries but really he was a great reporter, and he was only interested in that because the Wall Street Journal liked to publish those kind of stories on the front page. So he was somebody who really had an ear for a good story and an ear for rhythm when he wrote. And I really enjoyed the time with him, and I know he gave his readers a lot of pleasure through the years.
We are talking with Chris Clarey, who's been covering the sport of tennis for decades for the New York Times. Chris, we saw Dominic Thiem win the U.S. Open last year, broke a streak of 13 in a row from the big three winning majors, Roger, Rafa, Novak. Will we see another first-time winner on the men's side this year at a Grand Slam? And who do you think has the best chance of doing that?
Well, first-time winner, I don't know. I still like Dominic Thiem's chances of winning another slam this year, and I think it's going to be fascinating to see which one it ends up being. I really am looking forward to the French Open, at the right time of year, if they can play it then, with Dominic Thiem fresh instead of coming in off of winning his first Grand Slam at the U.S. Open with the jet lag and everything else coming in and the fatigue. I would love to see Dominic Thiem at his best match up with Rafa Nadal at his best on clay. But as far as other first-time winners, the player I think who has the most upside that I've seen really remains Stefanos Tsitsipas. I love his game. He's a player with a wonderful charisma on court, can hit all the shots, and I think he's pretty close. So if I was going to bet on anybody this year on a fast surface, I might go with Stefanos.
Chris, I may be mistaken. I remember you vaguely walking around the Australian Open grounds with a boot on your foot, that an Achilles injury wasn't going to stop you from going to Melbourne. I'm curious about your Melbourne track record. When's the last time you've missed this event? And also, what do the 90 days coming up look like for you?
Well, John, I've missed a couple through the years, but I've been to most of them in the last 25 years. The one that you referenced was, a tennis player from college trying to go back at a high level and blowing out my Achilles before the Australian Open. So that was not a high point in my tennis career or my journalistic career, but I made it through, man. I made it through with the boot in the air and covered the tournament from my seat. But as far as this year goes, I'm actually not going for a bunch of reasons, but in a lot of ways, very exciting for me. I'm actually working on a big book about Roger Federer, and it's coming out in April. So I'm actually on book leave right now for a few months, but I'll be back, and I'll certainly be watching the tournament very closely from afar.
All right, on book leave. Well, look forward to reading that when it comes out about Roger Federer. Chris, thanks as always for joining us here on Tennis Channel Live, and look forward to seeing you hopefully in person sometime soon. John, also, thanks for joining us today, and we will see you back here tomorrow.